Well, thank you very, very much for inviting me. I don't know if I can, Chris, if I can take the mantle of being responsible for people coming back in 6 months, but I will tell you that what I'm going to be talking to you about today is actually it's a combination of several things that are passions of mine. From the beginning of my career in human resources, I was responsible for, oddly enough, working with change efforts right from the get-go. But in those days, a while back, it was the sort of thing, well, if we get through this change, then we'll be done and it'll all be easy and we can, you know, take it easy. And that's not the way it is anymore. We are living in a very interesting world. Even at the University of Minnesota, change is constant, constantly being asked. We have to be adaptable and able to do that, and certainly project teams have that going in spades. So what's interesting to me is that as we have progressed in this whole change work, we're learning a lot more about resilience, and neuroscience is helping us know so much more about what's going on in our brains as we face threat, as we face challenge, as we face needing to do things differently. And so today I'm going to be sharing a number of things that are going to first explain the whole deal and where the stress is coming from and how our brain is working. I'll take a minute and talk about a bit later about the 100 billion neurons you have going in your brain. So if some days you feel a little overwhelmed, you know, maybe there are a couple neurons up there that are a little you know, reacting to things. So we'll talk about that. So a little bit about how the brain works. Then we're going to be talking about how change is increasing and what impact that has. And we're also going to talk about what we can do about it. And so there are a lot of things that we can do, little teensy things. You know, oftentimes when we think about this stuff, it feels like we have to change our whole lives, but there are some things that we can do that are small. There are big things we can do, but there are also small things that we can do that make a difference for us on a daily basis, and when we're on teams, can help our teams do better on a daily basis. So I think that's the exciting part, that nowadays it's not about having the right motivation or having the right stuff. There's a lot of automatic stuff, and there are things we can do about that. So just want to be clear, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm an HR person who's helped more people than I can imagine work through change. And so the neuroscience has been really an overwhelming thing, and my job has changed in that it is completely different than it was more than 20 years ago when I started, because the orientation and the information we have has just changed a lot. So, and I want to warn you, you're going to get plenty of chance to chat amongst each other and apply what we're talking about, thinking about if it makes sense and that sort of thing. So if you're shy and unwilling to speak, okay, it's going to be frustrating. But for the rest of you, it probably will be interesting. Okay, so let's start out with this guy. This tiger is something that we probably don't run into on a daily basis. And our brain is set up to respond in certain ways. So if we were our ancestors way back when, back in the forest, and we would run into one of these guys, that's where the concept of fight or flight. We would either run as fast as we could or climb a tree or do something to get out of the way, because this is not a nice creature to run into in the forest. You don't want to do that. What we're finding through neuroscience, however, is that when we're faced with danger of any kind, our brain responds just as if we've met this guy. And that means even when we run into that day-to-day stuff that we run into, if we're told, oh, this field and this information is going to be changed, the same part of our brain lights up as it would if we ran into this guy. So even they found the question, and I have taught supervisory development where you're supposed to say, can I give you some feedback? They've even found that when you say, can I give you some feedback, that same brain part lights up. So that's how we react. And you know, we don't run into, I don't know about you, but I don't run into tigers much. Only selectively when I go to the zoo. So it's like we're over-programmed, and you'll see that in just a minute. We're over-programmed to respond to what we see as a threat. And so a whole lot of stuff that isn't threatening, we respond in that way. And that's not a particularly good thing. So I'm going to give you some references. And oh, by the way, I don't have handouts for you, but if anybody wants the material, you can let me know. Send me an email. I'm Rosie Berry. I will forward it to you. I don't know how do you guys post it Okay, you post it, so it'll be posted. And in there, in the end of this is a whole set of resources that you can look at if you want to read more. I'm going to be referencing a lot of the research, but in case you are interested, you can do that. So one of the books that I really recommend is called Wired for Joy. It's written by someone called Laurel Mellon, and it's a really, really, really easy book to read. It just gives you some ways about how you can think differently. But what she says, she's a researcher at UC San Francisco, and she says, in the world of brain chemistry, different translates to bad as the brain prefers everything to stay the same. So anything different is bad. I mean, isn't that amazing? And when you think about it, even the little things that are so irritating and you wonder, why am I so irritated? That's probably why. So that means that the changes are not welcomed of any kind. Now, some of you may say, I love change, and that may be true, but maybe you haven't run into some unwelcome changes because that can be challenging. So I want you to just to take a moment, because we're going to do a lot of conversation with someone sitting near you. I just want you to talk about the kinds of comments that you run into in your work that might be seen as threatening. If you think, can I give you some feedback as a threat? What other things are things that can be seen as threatening? So just take a couple minutes and see what you come up with. Right. Right. So the threat piece comes. So he said, I don't know, did you all hear? He said in doing research, there's sort of a sense of what if the information isn't right? It gets past the reviewers and blah, 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 but still, sorry, I didn't mean to turn into blah, blah, but nothing personal. It may get past the researchers, et cetera, get published, et cetera, and yet still, and maybe no one would ever know, but there is that sense of, you know, maybe there's something inaccurate in that. Okay, good example. What else?
Well, I was thinking more big picture.
Yep.
Can I talk to you?
Oh, that's a great one. Can I talk to you? Oh, yeah. Which could be, gee, I'd like to talk to you, or can I talk to you? Or, I mean, just the emphasis there is going to be a big one. What else? Yes.
Help me understand why.
Oh.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
Yeah. People think their authority is being questioned, or their, you know, expertise or something, rather than, you know, thinking that maybe you want to understand something better.
Right. And we're always being told nowadays that we're supposed to be collaborative, and so it depends on us helping to understand why we each think the way we do, because we don't all think the same. But yet, help me understand is a scary one. Any others? Yep.
Sometimes just, can we meet about this?
Yes.
So I don't know about anybody else, but I feel like I go away with the to-do list and everybody else walks out of the room. You know, so
Yes. So that's another good one. Can we meet about something? Okay, so there are plenty of examples at work, in particular in project teams, where this sort of reaction can occur. So let's learn a little bit more about what that all means. And so first of all, it's really a challenge to work in groups. You know, we all have our own way of thinking about things. We all have that focus. But there's a lot of opportunity there as well. In fact, if we go way back to the beginning when we were all hunters and gatherers, and we think about that, the very fact that we are here today means what? We worked in groups, and our ancestors worked in groups. Our ancestors did a good job. So think about it. Our ancestors made it possible for us to be here, which means they handled threat really well, which means they really recognize threat when it occurs, okay? So what did they hand down to us? We really get that there's a threat, and we may even be overreacting. We probably are overreacting to the threat because that's in our lineage. Because the people who didn't pay attention to threat or didn't get threat right, well, they ran into that tiger. And their you know, descendants aren't here. So we're all descendants of successfully worried people. And they have passed that on to us. And in fact, it's very interesting if you read about this, and I don't know that there's proof of this, but what they believe is that originally the brains were fairly small, but those people who joined together first in small groups and then in larger groups, became more successful because they had more food to eat and they were in a safer situation. And I mean, just think if you're by yourself in the forest, that's kind of scary. That's more dangerous. But the more people you bring together, the more possibility for food. And interestingly enough, the more food, the more your brain grows over time. And so there's a definite connection between the growth of the frontal cortex. And so if we think about that just for a moment, if we think of the handy model, which comes from Dan Seligman, this is the spinal cord, and this is the brain. And this is the old part of the brain, the amygdala, the emotional part, that kind that just makes you, fright or flight. And this part is the frontal cortex and all the stuff that goes with it, where the decision making is made. So way back then, we didn't have much of this, and over time, this is growing even more. So this is the fun part of it. So Dan Seligman, who came up with this stuff, says when you flip your lid, that's what happens. So we all know when people flip their lid, because they lose that, that questioning, that logical frontal cortex work. So the concept is that by working in groups, originally it made us grow this frontal cortex, become smarter, and have more food, which in turn grew that frontal cortex and became smarter. So what that means then is that we evolved to be social. And the benefit of being social is that it helps our brain, and we need each other just to eat. And the more we're together, the more we can eat. Now, which might explain certain things, but I'm not going there. That's not the topic for today. And so social interaction is very important for survival. So we saw that in terms of our ancestors getting together in groups and being able to hunt and protect each other. And we see it now as well, as we get together in groups to work on teams and so forth and get more done. Because with more people, as long as we're not too much into the threat, with more people we can get more done. We can come up with new and interesting ideas. So what happens though is, because if you think about it, the stress, and I'll talk about stress a little bit more in a minute, but stress has a very negative impact on the brain. You can actually lose brain cells from the stress. But being with people in positive situations actually grows new brain cells. So there's a lot of positivity in terms of being part of a group. And so that's one of the ways that we can deal with the stress. And so think about it. In a project, you need all those people to get the work done. So just a few more things about the brain, and then we'll get into what to do about it. And so we have the shared experience. And what's amazing to me is that you are all thinking a million things, literally a million things right now. You're all looking very attentive, so thank you very much. It helps me. But there's a lot of stuff going on in your brain. And not the least is that you're making conclusions about, so some of it is you're thinking about back at your desk, etc. You're thinking about your kids or whatever. You got all this stuff going on. But you're also in the moment paying attention, and your brain is making a lot of conclusions about things that you are not even aware of. And the first one that I want to talk about is the concept of gut reaction. And we're all really familiar with that concept, and it's actually a real thing. And there are actually, and this is my term, gut reaction cells in your brain. They are literally, that's what they do. They're called spindle cells. And their sole function in your brain is to give you judgment about others. And you do it before you're even aware of it. And that's where gut reaction comes from. They fire with a decision about another person in a 20th of a second, way faster than you can say, oh, I see Geraldine over there, and blah-de-blah, this is what I think of her. I've decided that way before I even said the name Geraldine, because that's how fast it is. And it happens in the older part of the brain, and it takes that time to get to the frontal cortex. That frontal cortex isn't doing the thinking immediately. There are other parts of the brain that do that. And there's a second part of the brain that has a special set of neurons called mirror neurons. And if you can imagine this, their sole job is to detect whether people are smiling or not. What's that about? Now, what it is about, which is kind of interesting, is whether or not you smile at someone has a big impact on how they receive it. And they've actually done research about performance feedback, everybody's favorite topic, I know. They've done research where they found out that if I tell you something about how badly you're doing, but I do it with a big smile on my face, okay, and that compared to given positive feedback with a frown, you're really doing a great job. Guess what? The negative feedback with a smile gets a much higher positivity rating than does the reverse. So if you want to give somebody feedback, say, first you're going to scare them, can I give you some feedback? And then do it with a smile, it'll go a lot better. There also are a set of neurons in the head called oscillator neurons, and we see them at play here. Do you notice they all have the same position? Have you ever been in a meeting and you noticed everybody's sitting back or everybody's leaning forward? Or sometimes you'll be at a restaurant and you'll see people and they're kind of literally mirroring their behavior. They're kind of leaning in at the same time. Or sometimes I notice in my family everybody's leaning back and doing that. Those are mirror neurons. And, excuse me, oscillator neurons. And they are really there to coordinate things. So you're not going to be a good dancer unless you have good oscillator neurons. And think about what that means for a team, a project team. Now, you can't do anything about your oscillator neurons, but it's good to know that that's kind of, if you have somebody who, or people that aren't getting along, and you have physical signs of it, that gives you a sense of it, and then you might want to address it in a number of different ways. We'll get to that later. And the last thing I'm going to talk about before you start working really hard is mood contagion. So how many of you have worked in a group where you really enjoyed everybody you've been with, and how many of you have worked in a group where it was really sort of deadly and people didn't get along? Some of that, yep. Yeah. Some of that, a good chunk of that has to do with mood contagion. And mood contagion is a topic that was studied here at the University of Minnesota by Joyce Bono, a researcher at the Carlson School. She has since moved on to the University of Florida. But she studied mood contagion, and she found that it is actually a thing. It's a real thing. And she looked at how positive emotions would be shared in the work setting. And she found that leaders, project team leaders, had a strong impact on the mood of the team. And what they showed to the rest of the group had a big impact in terms of what was going on with how the group felt about things, how people were able to participate, etc. And so what's interesting, then if you pair that up with the neuroscience, they've found that positive connections, so if I'm talking to any one of you and we're having a good conversation and really engaged, that actually increases the secretion of oxytocin in the brain, which is a positive chemical, and then we're in a better mood. So literally those connections make a big difference. So in this piece, it's important to know we have choices. So for example, if you, and everyone needs to vent sometimes, I'm not going to deny that, even I do on occasion, but if you spend all your time venting with the same people, that is not the kind of connection with another person we're talking to. But if you can get a pat on the back or you can have a good conversation, that increases the positive chemicals in the brain. And that's a really important thing. So if you think about something I said a little earlier, that there are lots of little things that we can do on a daily basis. So just something as, how do I connect with a positive person every day? Doesn't even have to be a long conversation. Can be helpful in that kind of way. So now you're going to have to work. So what I want you to do is think of a great project leader or manager that you've had. What did the leader do that created a positive mood? And maybe that's you, I don't know. And then think about a challenging project situation. How does mood contagion fit in? Your own mood or that of others, and how can you be a better leader in that situation? So let's take about maybe 5 minutes to talk about that, again, just with people around you, and we'll see what we come up with. So, have any of you experienced a great project leader or manager? What did they do that created a positive mood? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so combined, this is the Walk on Water project manager, is authentic, is prepared and sets the team up for success, that they're leading toward results, and that the leader has helped staff achieve their goals.
Nice.
How about that?
Isn't that awesome? Yeah. That requires a clap. Who can add to that? Geraldine.
Well, I was thinking about somebody in particular who is good at minimizing drama. You know, and so that contagion thing kind of feeds on itself when people get in a tether. And if you're really good at just sort of minimizing it, not negating it and making you feel bad for feeling that way, I think that's a real gift.
Yes, yes, very much so, because drama doesn't help at all. Drama is a problem. Yes, ma'am.
A person who was able to, kind of towards that point, sort of prioritize like your entire work moment, like what is your top priority, do it at the expense of everything else, and anybody who has a problem with that, send them to me. Like gave you the room to meet the deadline, and then if that step was then to go to somebody else on the team, would vest that person in the team with, if you don't have it by this point, it is your job to get up, go to this person, see what you can do to help them finish it so that you can get it. So that she tied people together in the chain of handoffs.
Right.
Because a lot of times in a project, it's at the handoff spot where something gets dropped. So she kind of helped you really grow into the team part of the team, you know.
Right.
So
you had a team focus as opposed to I did my part,
Done.
you know, now it's yours. Okay, that's a good one. Yes.
We talked about how sometimes a project manager or leader doesn't always have that kind of positive, you know, personality, but a good leader knows who in the group does and uses that person because they have that strength.
Right. Yes. So it's part of just knowing what you can do to make sure it happens. Yeah, that's good. Who else?
My project manager is sitting behind me from the
Okay.
She's really good about giving our team autonomy and letting us get our work done, but being there to go, okay, I don't know if I can handle this, and allowing like communication and collaboration.
Right. Cool.
Thanks, Susan.
She did.
I'm still in the back right now.
Didn't she describe that well? Yeah. Okay.
We talked about being goal-centered, and then we also talked about a leader not being, not having too much ego invested, not being overly defensive, so that if there's disagreement or a new idea pops up that wasn't necessarily the leader's original train of thought, they're open to that, so that kind of the best collective ideas are allowed to bubble up.
Flourish. Okay.
Question.
Yeah.
I think I heard this and I just want to make sure. But there are a lot of instances where I work with people who are very good at having an upbeat facade, like smiling and like everything's great. But then like trash talking, like what comes out of their mouth is really different from how they're acting.
Wow.
And I'm just wondering, like you said something about how you can deliver a message with a smile, and in some cases people will take that better than they would if you delivered that message with the same message with a frown. Now, does this whole like facade doesn't match the what the words are or the inner stuff? Does that work in the same way? Like, should we all just have a facade that's like cheerful and upbeat, and then just
No. Thank you for bringing that up because I don't want you to play fake. That's not the point. It's just important to know that people react more positively to things that are positive. But at the same time, what you've described is there's a facade of acting really pleasant and then trash talking. Those are two mixed things, and if we were going there, we might be able to come up with a psych diagnosis for that, but we're not going to. We're not going there. Yeah. So nothing I'm saying is about let's put on a facade that's not there. But by the same token, there are plenty of situations where you can decide in your head, I'm going to go positive on this. I'm not going to go negative. And I always, in this sort of situation, I always think of my mother, bless her heart, who is the most negative person I know, and will always take what's the worst possible thing that could happen and go with it. Well, that just, and when we get to talking about the connections in the brain, that just makes the negative ones deeper. So we always have the opportunity of I can look positively, or I can think positively, or I can think negatively. Am I going to expect the best or the worst? And that's an important clarification. Okay, how about the mood contagion? What did you notice about mood contagion? Does it happen? Oh yeah, yeah. If we were going to do an exercise where I asked you to talk about what was your best work situation you've ever been in and what's the worst one, and mood contagion is part of that. Because there's a funny thing about being in a group or a team. It's a really interesting thing that you can build, you've got a certain thing going on, a certain culture, but it's like if there's a person who's really positive, it just makes it better, and if they're truly positive, it makes it better. And if you've got somebody who's just a downer like my mom, you know, it just makes it worse. I need therapy, don't I? That's fine. That's fine. But yeah. But that really gets to the point of that mood contagion. And so the more you go into that negativity, or the more you go into the positivity, either one, that then builds. And as you know, when you're around somebody who's really negative and always complaining, it's just really hard to feel positive about what's going to happen. Okay, so let's get to this next model, which I really like. This is the SCARF model, based on SCARF. And David Rock is a scientist and a researcher, and what he has done is gone into many of these neuroscience articles, and you know, with all total respect for the people who wrote them, you can't read too many of those at a time because they're dense and detailed and etc. So that's great, but he's been able to go in and kind of, for the practitioner, which I am, kind of summarize it up into a high level so we can think in terms of what this actually means and what we might want to do. And so he says that the research tells us that we can minimize threats and our threat responses and enable reward responses. We'll talk about that, what that means in a minute, in several ways. And we can use these to take care of ourselves, and we can use these in how we interact with others in challenges, and these are the things that get hooked. So I'll tell you right off the bat that if I gave you a test, and there actually is a test that determines which are your bigger hooks in this model, we would be able to figure them out, and everyone has a different one or two because we're all individuals. But these are the things that most get hooked, and the first one is status. And anytime, we all think of status. Well, what does that mean? That means at the University of Minnesota, do I sit by a window? Which, doing the work I do, I can tell you that's always in play. It's always an issue. Do I sit by a window? How big is my workspace? Do I have a desk? Now, I work in an open space now. Open space, and because I'm here, not at my desk very much. I'm always out and about, so I have no desk. So hence I have no status. Do you think? I don't know. Anyway, so things like the size of the desk, my cube next to your cube, my equipment is newer than your equipment, all those sorts of things impact status. And when we go through these change situations, and our status, meaning we have to move to a different building and now we have smaller space, or we were really in the premier group and we were in the special spot next to the dean, the VP, whatever, and now we're down in the basement, all of those things impact how we feel about them. And as you project manage these teams, even as you bring your team together to work on a project, if you're relocating together, oh my, do you have the right equipment? Does it work, etc. About 6 or 7 years ago, when we combined colleges here at the university, and we had 13 instead of, 15, 16, one of the big issues that occurred was when the teams moved to new locations, and their phone wasn't hooked up, their computers didn't work, etc. The equipment wasn't there. That is a status thing. In other words, my work isn't important enough to have the equipment that I need. No one cares enough. So that's status. The second one is certainty. And whenever we're talking about a project, this is where the brain comes in, because even if you're talking about putting a new process in place so that instead of clicking at the left hand of the screen, you're now going to click at the right hand of the screen, and you have to go to return and blah, blah, blah. Even if which is pretty minor until it's your thing, that is seen as a threat. And we react, that lack of certainty, we react immediately, and we don't like it very much, and it can come out in all sorts of different ways. That's autonomy. We like to work with a comfortable mental map. And frankly, the brain, it's easier for your brain when you can do things automatically. It actually takes less energy to do things in your customatic way as opposed to having to think about it, obviously. So if I ask you, assuming you drove to work today, you know, what was your drive like? It's automatic. If you didn't run into an accident, traffic wasn't weird, you didn't have to do anything weird, you would not be able to tell me anything about that drive in that situation. However, if it was a storm or you had an accident, you could tell me all about it. That took more energy and more effort. And so that's an important part of certainty. The next one is autonomy, and that's how much control you have over choices and your environment. So, for example, if you have to do things in a different way, and you were maybe in your former situation, you could make a lot of choices, and now the situation, maybe the system has changed, and now instead of making all those choices, things are streamlined. It's a great thing. Streamlining is great. But it also means that you may have less chance to make decisions. Things may have been decided for you, and then that takes away, in a sense, your autonomy. The next one is relatedness. This one comes up on things like how one person is treated. It comes up in terms of we've worked together a long time, and now the work is different because of the new project. And so even though I've worked with you three for the last 5 years, now I'm going to have to work with the three of you, and we always go to lunch, and I'm going to a new building, and you get to keep doing that, and I have to go with you, and it's going to take me a while to find out that you guys are really nice too, I'm sure. But that's sort of relatedness because, you know, we're at work, and it's not supposed to be family, blah-de-blah, but at the end of the day, we spend a lot of time with each other when we're at work. And so when that changes and we have that relationship and it changes, that's a challenge. And the last one is fairness, and that is who gets the new computer? Who gets to sit by the printer? Who gets all of these things? We don't get them, or who, okay, we're all going to go to laptops. This happened recently somewhere, I won't say where. We're all going to go to laptops. You guys get the lighter laptops. You guys get the heavier laptops. You know? That's fairness. And depending upon which place you are and what you need, maybe you have a light computer, but you really want a heavy one because it does more, that's, you know, or vice versa. So all of these things come to play. And it's very interesting because when I work with people, you can usually say which ones are really important to you and which ones you don't care about. Now for me, I'll just out myself. The most important one to me is autonomy. I like to be able to have control and make some decisions. I don't really care about status, which is lucky since I don't even have a desk anymore. I do have a nice locker though. It's nice though, I make fun. But anyway, you can all decide, you know, and know which are the ones that are going to be your hooks. So on your project team, actually, it's not a bad idea to spend a little time and talk about what really hooks you so that you can understand that. Or at a minimum, if that's too dangerous, it's good to think about which are the things that hook you and be aware of that so that if you do get hooked, you can think about what that means.
And sometimes you don't know them until the change is happening. Like
Yes.
you don't know that you care about your desk until
Yes.
your office is moving.
Exactly. It's really easy, and I run into this all the time. People say, oh, none of that stuff bothers me. I love change. Okay, they love change until their great office with a really nice window that they just happen to have, they get moved, and now they're in the basement and there are no windows at all. You know, then it's a whole different story. You know, so it's always very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so now you get to talk again. And I want you to talk about, have you seen the SCARF traits in action in the teams you've been on? How does SCARF hook you? Which of the items are important to you? And what can a project manager do when a team member is hooked? And what have you done that has worked for you or for others? Let's take 5 minutes. So does this SCARF stuff make sense? Have you seen it at play? Seen it at work? Okay. Anybody have an example they want to share? The room becomes quiet. Yes.
We recently moved a bunch of people over to the new Physics and Nanotechnology building. And we had a group that did not order the copiers in time, did not order the scanners, did not have the phone set up. And so people that went over there first, it was very much like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I heard about it. I wasn't part of it, but I heard about it.
Oh, yeah.
And so I did feel, okay, look, they should fix it.
Yes.
And it still took 6 weeks to get it here.
Yes. It's very, very
Wait
challenging.
to move until you have everything in place.
Yep, yep, as much as possible, because people take that very personally.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, don't you get what I need to do my job? Don't you value the work I do, et cetera? So that can be a very big thing. One more, yes.
So we talked a little bit about like recognizing when we might be judgmental of others who have different hang-ups from us.
Yes. Yes.
And making unfair judgments when, you know, I may have the same reaction that's related to the hang-up that I have.
Exactly. So making fun of somebody who really cares about that window, because you just don't care about the window, but you really care about, you know, whether something's fair, you know, so how you're treated compared to me. Yes. Oh, okay. All right. So these things do come into play. So let's move into talking about change, and we talk about change only to understand it, because resilience is what we do. Build our resilience so we can manage the change, okay? So let's talk just for a minute about why change is hard. And part of it is that our working memory in our brain is very small. And really what happens is it takes in what it can during the day, and then when you sleep, which is one of the reasons why sleep is so important, when you sleep, it translates that into your longer term memory. So sleep is really important. But think about it this way. If your short-term memory, what happens today, is really small, that means the more decisions you have to make, the more thinking you have to do, the more things that change in the day, it's going to take more effort, and it's going to be harder on you. And most of the time, the work we do is routine. In other words, a lot of what we do is automatic. We don't have to give it a lot of thought, so it doesn't take up much of our working memory. But as soon as something changes, which could be just as simple as a new form, something as simple as a new form, and whoever puts together the form, see, it seems really simple, but when you get the new form and it's not done in the same way, it takes effort to find the spaces where the EMPL ID goes or where all that stuff goes. And so because it takes more energy, we become tired, and it's really kind of overwhelming. We are very good at detecting errors, and that part of the brain that lights up when we're under threat is the part that lights up when you see something as an error. Your brain just goes, ah, something's wrong, something's wrong. And in fact, they in one study, and how they come up with these things they do in studies always amazes me. In this study, they gave people an expectation that they would get something sweet to eat, and instead they got something bitter, and that part of the brain lit up. That was the threat area. Something was wrong. So that just kind of gives you an idea of how reactive this means. And what it also means is when something is not what we expect, our brains react, and we might even have an emotional reaction. And sometimes we are very puzzled why somebody is really reacting emotionally, and it can be something like that. So let's take a moment and talk about stress. And remember, I talked about our ancestors a little bit ago, talked about how they were very good at detecting stress, and that's why we're here today. And what we find is in the research, everybody has 5 times more circuitry in their brain for stress than they do for threat than they do for rewards. So just think about that. And just note for a moment, how much attention do we pay rewarding ourselves at the end of getting something done? We don't really do that very often. And every model you find will say, you know, at the end of something you should celebrate, and we usually are too busy going on to the next thing. So what happens when our brain reacts and we're in threat mode is our cortisol goes up. Cortisol is a hormone, I'm sure you've all heard of it, and it's made to help us respond to a threat. So when there's a threat and we have to run or hide or something like that, the cortisol goes up. And our brain is just full of receptors for that. That's what we're talking about when we talk about all the threat circuitry. And the more stressed we get, the higher the cortisol. And guess what? This is great if there's actual danger. Not so good if it's just that a form has changed. So that's really an important thing to think about. And the danger is that if you continue the cortisol over time, you get hooked into this anxiousness, and finally you can get hooked into anxiety. And so that actually is a health risk that we should think about. Now, the good news is that our brain is, yes?
I was confused about that pie chart. Are you saying that's
Oh.
our current capacity to handle threat and reward? Like we can only handle this much reward?
No, it's just, I wouldn't go that far. I would just say our circuitry is set up 5 times more circuitry for the threat than it is for the reward. The point being, we're not stuck, never rewarding ourselves. We're just not automatically going to go there. So we need to plan for it. We need to think about it. Does that help? Okay. And so this is part of addressing that point. Our brain is like a river, and there is a terrific neuroscientist at MIT named Sebastian Sung. And actually, he's part of the Human Connectome Project, and we are as well at the university. But sometime, just for fun, you should go to that Human Connectome. It looks like Connect to Me. Go to their website. They've got these awesome slides of human brains in different colors, and the circuitry is highlighted, and it just gives you an idea of the complexity of what we're talking about. But what Sebastian Sung talks about is that neural activity is like water in a stream, and so think of a river. And so a river basically follows the same path, and the more it follows the same path, the deeper it gets cut, and the more it continues. Now, there can be a big storm or a flood, and what happens sometimes is new paths go around. An old river will, get windingness put into it. So it's not stuck. If enough rain happens, enough water happens, it can change its path. Sebastian Sung says that's the way our brain is. So we have all these pathways in our brain. We're born with certain pathways, and I don't know, maybe that's genetic, maybe not. I'm hoping not, because my mom, geez, what does that mean for me? I warned my daughter, take cover. Actually, off topic, I told my son-in-law, I said, so get a plan now. If I turn into that, I want you to rent a car, put me in the trunk, take me far out someplace, way far out in a woods. Just leave me there. I will be old and feeble and just die there. So I don't really mean that ill of my mother, but she is so negative, and her paths are really etched. And that's where we are. We have that choice to etch those paths more deeply, or we can think new thoughts. It used to be, the idea used to be, that our brain was set when we were 20 years old. We were never going to get smarter. We were never going to, if we have an accident, we might get dumber. But we were never going to get smarter or really be different. And now we know that isn't true. The brain is actually plastic, and it can be moved. And we do that by thinking different thoughts. So the more we think the same thought, the more etched it gets in. But if we introduce new ideas to ourselves, we can build new connections, and we can build new paths. So Daniel Goleman, if you've read anything about him, says, and this is to me I want to get this right, this is very amazing. He says we get 10,000 new stem cells every single day in our brain. They split in two. One continues to make stem cells, and the other migrates to where it's needed and becomes that kind of cell. That's called neurogenesis. So if we can recognize that our brain is changing all the time, we have all those options, and we can think of some new paths, we can change the wiring of our brain. We can change the path of the river. And it's, especially when we're thinking of habits, that can be really, really important. Now, the good news is that some of this doesn't have to be that hard. We can make small changes to build resilience every single day. I saw this great webinar just a couple of weeks ago on neuroplasticity, and they said, stand up and take a break every couple hours. Something as simple as that will get us thinking new things, will get chemicals going into our brain. So the people who get up and walk around the block, that's a great thing to do. So take a walk. And also allow rest time for your brain to reorganize the information. One new thing, and so in a little bit I'm going to ask you all to decide one new thing that you're going to do. One new thing that I've started to do is I don't look at my email before 7 o'clock in the morning. I know, I shouldn't have been doing that. I should probably wait till 8. But I was in the habit of looking first thing. Oh, what happened? Blah, blah. And you know what's even scarier? People had things. People would send me emails at 5 or 4 in the morning. That's terrible. There's somebody in this room who has done that, but I won't point any fingers. You know who you are. Anyway, so it's small things like that. And you know, the amazing thing is I can tell the difference, because what happens is, as I'm getting ready to go and I'm, you know, taking a shower and all these things, I am not thinking about those emails. I am thinking about the book I'm reading or something else. And these are the small things that you can do to build the resilience. So allow rest time for your brain to reorganize. Network to get different perspectives. I just read this article that networking, we all think networking is about, you know, getting a job. I just read this article that said if you are networking with people coming from different perspectives, this is an excellent way to get your brain going. So that's a really healthy thing to do. So what can you do to network? And you don't have to do it every day, but just, you know, get yourself to do that every once in a while. That can be helpful. And work, work, work without a break. That's where we're all going, isn't it? Work, 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 work. Without a break will limit your innovation. So part of the thing is not getting so, you know, oh, I got to get all these things done. It has to do with thinking about how are you going to get to where you need to get. Okay. Activity. So I want you to talk just for a couple minutes, thinking about this, building those new paths in your brain. What's worked for you in the past? How could you apply this? What would you like to do better? And what small new thing could you try? Go. I hate to interrupt such impassioned conversation, but you will get a chance to really get very real about this shortly. So the thing I want to leave with you in this particular discussion is I hope you're thinking about that bottom one, what small new thing can you try? We're going to revisit that question again a bit later. But now we're going to get very hands-on in terms of some tools that you can be using in building resilience. And the first one is the concept that self-regulation is a choice. You know, there is only one thing in this world that we mostly can control, and what is that? Ourselves. I know, don't you hate hearing that? But it is true. And the thing about it is we have the option of being reactive and reacting immediately when things happen, when that threat occurs, or we have the option of stepping back, buying ourselves a little time and thinking about it. And when we do that, we can look at the situation, we can give it some attention, and then we can make an appraisal. You know, is this worth it? How important is this? What do I want to do in this situation? Do I have any history about what would work in a situation like this? And so I can make a decision, and then I can respond. Too often, we go situations and go to the response and have that automatic response. And so the challenge is, how do we work to rewire that stuff in our brain so that we can do a better job of responding after doing that, after thinking it through? So let's think about understanding our habits. And so it's really important, first of all, to know what your habits are, both good and bad. And so one of the really important habits that you should be thinking about that you have is, what are your habits in terms of how do you chill? How do you chill out? What I see happening when I talk to most people is that they're getting so busy, and this whole concept of multitasking is making it worse. It's because we think we can be doing, should be doing all this stuff at the same time, checking our email and those darn phones. I mean, can you possibly give it up? No. But yet it's a terrible thing, isn't it? Because you're constantly looking at it and checking things out. Okay, so what are the habits, and what can we do in order to do them well? And if you're a team lead, think about what are you doing to model positive chilling out to your team. It's a really healthy thing, and I'll get to this in a few minutes. It's a really healthy thing to get up and take a walk around the block. There's a lot of research about, you know, sitting in that same place, your body gets sluggish, you're not, you know, and walking around the block will send positive chemicals to your brain, and you'll get a new idea. So there's a lot of positivity to doing that. The second one is your thought patterns can be changed. So you can practice thinking new things. You can set a little reminder on your calendar to remind you to think something positively. That's perfectly okay. And paying attention to things, just paying attention to things, we'll talk about meditation in a minute, can rewire those habits. It's also important to focus on what's right, not what's wrong. The brain is a funny thing. It doesn't really understand no. And so when you tell yourself something like, if I said, don't think about a pink elephant, what immediately happens? Boom, a pink elephant is in your brain. Now, I'm not a golfer, but I understand that if you try to think about something like, I'm going to, hit the, what's the ball? I'm not a golfer. I'm going to hit the green or something like, okay, that's a good thing to say, but I'm not going to, hit into something. Anytime the brain hears not, it gets totally confused, and it may actually try to do that. So that's something to pay attention. And then just work on regulating your thinking. That's kind of like what we were talking about in the last slide. So here's some more things you can do. Practice giving yourself 6 seconds. They found that, back to our little brain model, they found that this old emotional part of the brain, that's where things go automatically. And if you can keep from responding and reacting for 6 seconds, you can bring that back into motion, and you can start being rational again, so you're not reacting emotionally. So find a way, and there's a group called 6seconds.org online, and they recommend that you come up with something ahead of time. That's your way to get 6 seconds, like coming up with 6 of the 7 dwarfs, which would take me more than 6 seconds, that's for sure. Or counting backwards from 100, or thinking of 6 capitals in Asia, or whatever, but anything to distract yourself, and that gets you back into your logical part of the brain. Focusing on the positive, that helps to build the positive circuitry, so what can you do with that? Consider play. Think of how much fun it is to play a game where there's a big challenge in it, and try to think of a challenge in that mode. Study yourself. Think about what's worked for you in the past that you might do. Make connections with positive others. That's really key. It's easy to always complain at the same time with the same people, but what does that get you? So think about some positive things. Celebrate your accomplishments. We do that kind of poorly here at the university. So think about what that is. And then practice choice. Choose what you pay attention to. That's another form of regulation. And then we can build resilience. This is the key. Have the resilience ready when you need it. Because what happens most of the time is we freak ourselves out, we overdo, and then we think, oh, I better build resilience. Well, that's a darn hard time to do it. You really need to think about it in advance because it's about energy, and you need to have that. And I really want to stress those small changes, standing up, moving, walking around the block, walking to the copier, getting a cup of coffee, all those sorts of things, cup of coffee, are really helpful, and doing them regularly. You can also exercise, yoga, meditation. I attended a thing on meditation not too long ago where they talked about just coming up with a very simple meditative thing, which is just like 3 minutes of deep breathing or something like that, and putting that on your calendar and, reminding yourself to do it. You don't have to do it a lot, but just something like that can really give you a break. And anytime you give yourself a break from all that constant worrying, that's good. And my very favorite one, stop ruminating. This builds negative wiring. So if you are a worrier, instead of worrying all the time and thinking about anything possible that might be a problem, instead think about, okay, maybe at 4 o'clock, there's a little typo there. I don't know what's and. Schedule a time for each day for it. And I'm thinking stick to it. Because if you just set this time aside, you know you have time to do it. So you don't have to worry about not getting to it. But instead of worrying all the time, it's much healthier for you. Okay, your challenge. You have a few minutes to think about what you can start, and think small, what you can start doing, stop doing, or continue doing that will help you and your team, or it could be you or your team. How will you practice it? How will you reward yourself for following through? How will you help your team practice one thing, and how you reward your team when you practice one thing? So those are a lot of questions, but just pick a couple. First, start with what can you start, stop, and continue, and particularly think about how to do the reward, because we just don't do that. Go. Who has an idea that they're willing to share with the group? It could be something you're going to do for yourself, or something you're going to do for the team, or have the team do. Yes, ma'am.
We used to be really good at taking walks over lunch when we were at a different location. Now we've decided that the way we're gonna get back to it, we're gonna hold ourselves accountable, and that actually being out on a day like today is a reward.
Yes.
So it kind of meets several criteria.
Yes, I think that's a great idea. How about another one? You need to inspire each other. Yeah.
I can think of trying to work a 5-day work week because as a graduate student, there's no specific schedule imposed on
Yes.
you. So it's just about holidays being alike.
Yeah.
So maybe it would be healthy to strive for that 5-day work week and get my own
Yes.
choose.
Yes. It would be. It would be. Yes. Because you know what happens? As you go along, and I don't know what your career, etc. plans are, but I have coached a number of fairly high-level faculty people, like chairs or whatever, and they're still doing that without thinking. They're working constantly. There is no Monday through Friday, and they're wondering why they're burned out. So now's a good time to start. What else? Yeah.
We just talked about the importance of celebrating milestones with your team, and that it doesn't have to be a whole drinks, formal dinner out or anything, that you can just, bring a snack or something to the meeting or have a meeting or a different venue. Taking 5 minutes to acknowledge what everybody has done to see that project through can actually really motivate, especially if you have to start the next phase of the project, or it was a big project and you're going to do it again, that the celebration is important.
Nice marker. Yes. Very true. One more. Yep.
We work in academic advising and career counseling. We talk a little bit about how we often talk to each other about our students, our difficult students, or situations that have been difficult for us in dealing with students. And instead of focusing on those, we'd like to start talking about the positive impacts of that on student lives or student successes.
Yes.
Often I think we do it as part of feedback, kind of feedback on what we should do moving
Sure.
forward, but I think it's also better to couple that
Sure.
with positive.
Yes. Yes. And counselor type people have that sort of model of we're going to do case study and talk about what worked and didn't work. And so you can easily get down that path of, oh, what went wrong, as opposed to what are we going to celebrate. Okay, great. These are great suggestions. So I really invite you to think about some small things that you can do to build resilience. So, any questions? Okay. I just want to tell you, so we have a resource list. So this is all the stuff that I've been referring to. And again, this will be posted on the... Okay. Yeah. So feel free to enjoy that. And I wish you all the best. And try to remember what's your one thing you're going to do, because it'll make a difference. Thanks.